want to explore the theme and some of the questions around winning and growth. And the first thing that I start with a supposition around is that the environment that we're in relationship to is a fractally larger representation of the internal psyche that the community, the family, the culture, the country are larger scale renderings of the microcosm, the smaller fractal pattern of the human psyche. And so from this perspective, the real breakthrough or the real opportunity is to transform the inner dialogue, the inner pattern of relationship within the psyche. Because in an unconscious culture where the inner world is largely invisible and neglected, in order to work with an inner pattern, we work at the larger magnification of scale, which is, if you think of the individual self in relationship to the various voices in the cult, in the family system, you could call them all cults, but there's the culture of the family system, the culture of the community, the larger culture, which has an energy signature, an energy pattern of emphasis, of clarity, of obscuring. We all have the basic hardware for every frame of mind, every human state, every pattern of human interaction to be replicated. You just delete certain things, block out certain truths, emphasize other truths, and you get this cult. And you delete other things, amplify other things, and you get another cult. Generally speaking, a state of grace, is a state of symmetry. So you have the kind of the ideal of the yin and the yang and that beautiful symbol with those little dots that point out that the polarity is actually a little bit of an illusion, that you cannot have yin without yang, you cannot have yang without yin, that it's actually a partnership. It's one energy field that is being looked at through a lens that breaks it into two, and having broken it into two through that lens that breaks things into two, the question is then, how do they relate? How does the masculine and the feminine relate? And so you have all these polarities. You have the masculine energy of causing, you have the feminine energy of allowing. And both are equally present in an abuse. For example, when the father perpetrates incest and the mother allows it to make her own life easier, both things wound the child somewhat equally, because you have the feminine principle that's saying, I'm going to allow this, and you have the masculine principle saying, I'm going to violate. And between the two, there's no support. If the mother says, no, I'm not going to allow this to occur, I'll call the police, I'll ask for neighborhood support. I mean, just imagine the difference in a culture where a mother who has some concern about a boyfriend or a father abusing the children puts the child first, knocks on everyone's door, and simply says, look, there's a man hurting my children. and I do not have the resources financially, emotionally. I'm afraid for my life. I'm afraid for my children, but I've got a much bigger problem because we're a cult that shames and punishes people for expressing the cult shadow, for bringing it to light. So it's not just a problem of interrupting the violence tonight or the incest tonight. The problem is that I don't have support in this culture. I don't have a place to go. And it's particularly sad when if you've been abused at home by a mother who allowed and a father who perpetrated, or if the roles are reversed, the mother perpetrates the violence and the father allows. Both have to be present. You can have two perpetrators and both parts within the psyche allowing the abuse. But if the woman puts the child ahead of the abuse, and how many neighbors does she have to knock on in this culture before not only is the child supported, in interrupting the violence, but where the family is cared for if the breadwinner is persecuted, and where's the framework of support? How many neighbors shut the door and say, "Sorry, I don't know you, and so I'm not going to know you," because that's one of the catch-22 of our fear of the feminine, which gets projected out on the fear of the unknown, which then gets projected onto the fear of the stranger, which then becomes this self-referential loop that says, I don't know you, and so I'm not going to get to know you because I don't know you, and I'm not going to engage with you because I don't know you. I've met this wall, at various times in our culture, and it's like that's the best you've got. You don't know me, so you're not going to know me because you don't know me, and you're not going to know me because you're not going to get to know me, and you're not going to get to know me because you don't know me. It's very self-referential, and so you see the defensive nature against the fear of the unknown. And the more trauma that is in a cult, the more fear of the unknown is present. But would she have to knock on 500, 100, 50? And there is, of course, a wound being perpetrated to this core sense, the persona that at some level understands that we are one planet, that we are one species, that we are one country, that we're one city, that we're one community, that we're one neighborhood. This is the wound that is being opened as each person shuts the door, or rather than asking for help, starts a gossip mill to shame those who come forward. But how many people would make this woman feel small for needing help and feel excluded for needing help with this supposition that the mother actually goes around the neighborhood and asks for help? I'm busy, I'm watching TV, I don't know you, Can't you call someone else? See, the trouble with abusive families is you don't have a family to go back on, because there's just more abuse back there. And there's the same defense. We don't talk about the abuse in this family. We don't apologize. So the wound gets, grated on rather than healed. Or it gets shamed. When you shame the feminine, one of the aspects in masculine-feminine dynamics, and we're not talking about male and female, we're talking masculine and feminine. The one who listens, the one who receives, the one who needs, the one who waits is in the feminine position. The one who responds to the need, the one who speaks, the one who initiates, is in a masculine position. And obviously, every man and every woman has this masculine and feminine side. The allowing is the feminine side. The circle must allow. And the circle is the feminine polarity in a community. The circle has to allow something, has to stay silent, has to refuse to respond to the call in order for the point, an individual, a group, etc., to perpetrate violation on whatever it is, a child, an incest, etc. But the child gets a very different understanding of their value, because in whether the mother stays silent or actually looks away from the incident in fear because she doesn't know how to respond to the violation in a hostile environment, in a pathological or sociopathic environment, where her need is going to be a basis for judgment, for criticism, for increased survival trauma, as opposed to empathic response and help. In an empathic culture, she has to knock on one door, and the response is immediate. Your need is greater than my television, greater than my job promotion, blah, 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 blah. You have an immediate need. How can we help? And simultaneously, what if the roles are reversed? What if the woman is the violator and the father goes around? Is the male figure welcomed in a feminine role of asking for help? Or is it only the female who is welcome? I've often noticed that females in our culture are met with far less fear of kind of the unknown than males. That I would not be viewed as a threat to children in this culture by playing with children if I was female. But because I'm male, I have about 10 seconds to engage with, a stranger child before threat alarms go up because of gender, which is, again, projecting the fearful trauma onto the unknown, onto all men, because of 1 in 1,000 incidents or whatever of where the stranger is more dangerous than beneficial. It's very problematic when we have a cult that is dogmatically frightened of the unknown, and where that's exaggerated to men, because we're in a situation where 99% of all that we need to live optimally and well-being is in the unknown. It's the strangers that know things that we don't, that can provide a clearer resolution to the picture. It's the strangers who have resources that we don't, who have talents that we don't. The stranger on a mathematical level is the most potent resource within any culture. The stranger brings with them in the unknown both positive and negative potential. And the real skill, of course, is how to navigate that. And this is something we don't learn. We learn to not talk to strangers, to be afraid of strangers, to be afraid of the unknown, to be afraid of the feminine. Don't feel too much. Don't look in there too much. Stay with your head down in the known terrain as we go over a cliff as a culture. Determine not to lift our heads and really examine and deal with the alternatives. The reality is that this force, well, going back to it's a big difference for the child if the mother goes out and says, I'm going to get us help, whatever it takes, so that you're safe. And can she rely on her culture in any way, shape, or form to guarantee the survival, the security, the sense of love and belonging and dignity of the family? In a shame-based culture, you lose your dignity for being part of an abusive cycle. The abuser loses their dignity for abusing, and the victim loses their identity because we like to blame victims for, we did this for the longest time with women who were raped. Blame the woman. If it wasn't for you shouldn't have been wearing high heels, whatever it was. We had a humiliating and shameful process, and it's shifting in present time. As with the Me Too movement, but it's not shifting enough in the sense that if you look at the survivors of the Harvey Weinstein episode and their personal fallout for coming forward, I watched one interview where she has over $200,000 in debt for therapy and legal fees as a result of coming forward. Because our culture doesn't know how to hold its own wound. And rather than face the prospect of changes in the cult, changes in the status quo, we scapegoat both our victims and our perpetrators, and simultaneously protect the status quo, because the status quo produces both victims and perpetrators very logically, very systematically, very predictably, and has been doing so for hundreds of years. So as a cult, we produce violators and victims by producing individuals without the competency to address the various energy fields that are being processed in both victim and violation. Most, for example, sexual abuses occur with a close family member or someone known in the family. And so it's actually counter. If you were to really educate your children based on data, you would say be suspicious of everyone in your family system because you're most likely to be harmed psychologically, physically, and sexually by someone in your system who's close. And get to know strangers, because some of them will be valuable resources, and because they don't have the vested interest in maintaining the power structure of the status quo, you should have people who can look in on the outside and say, yeah, that's pathological narcissism right there. You have to decide what to do with that, but yeah, that's what you're seeing from your father or from your mother or from your aunt or something in this situation. And no, they are not your friend in this domain and this domain. There's a healthy aspect and there's a toxic aspect, and you have to know the difference and know where your risks are coming from. They're highest in the known circle. And so get to know strangers, get to understand the difference between the safe parts of the psyche, which are the mature parts of the psyche, the adults. The adult, by definition, is the one who loves and understands and attunes to the various parts within, and having done so with some degree of mastery, naturally turns their attention outward. A healthy individual with a strong core is always looking out, with what goes from the adult to the role of the leader or the king, or in the female kind of archetype, the queen. These things are important to do within my psyche, and now I'm an adult. Now I'm capable of advocating for other people, because the same strength, the integrated self within the nurturing parent and leader of the adult, which realizes most of the potential within the psyche, most of your potential as a human being, is determined by whether or not you have a strong nurturing parent within you that will fight the abusive parts within you from violating the wounded parts within you because of an asymmetrical power dynamic, which is that our cult boosts up the masculine in both men and women. The assertiveness, the speaking, the competitiveness, the violation, the hunter instinct, the sociopathic sense of this goal is what I'm focused on, and so I don't care about anything else other than this goal. And in our cult, the financial pyramid, we call ourselves capitalists, not humanists. And so we don't measure how many healthy human beings we produce as kind of our metric of reference. What we measure is how many dollars we create, and then how many dollars we can turn those dollars into. And so that's the whole capitalist metric. And so you have the Forbes 400 list and the Fortune 500 list and the Fortune 100 list to measure what? Who's winning at that game? Who's turning the most amount of money into more money? But nobody's measuring the human capital. No one's measuring how. Have you created 5 adults in your interactions with growing human beings? Have you created 1,000 adults? Because there could be a list of the most competent adults who can be measured in terms of their initiatory influence on other regressed grown-ups to actually become adults. And then you could say, this is the most competent human being because they have helped 1,000 people go from a regressed, shame-based, fear-based system into becoming an adult. And so here's them at the top. You've done this for 1,000 people. You've done it for 800 people. You have a fortune list of people fortunate enough to meet an adult in a sociopathic cult and transcend the reptilian brain with competency to actually create survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, etc., to create an environment in which those things blossom. But that's not our cult. And I've spent a lot of time referencing a pattern of events at the Human Awareness Institute and with the facilitator body and with Peter Sandhill more specifically, because my personal wound has been the denigration, the dishonor, the shame, the fear, the invisibility, and the loneliness, the desperate loneliness of my feminine identity. So we're dealing with empathy, we're dealing with group consciousness, we're dealing with relationship, we're dealing with into me you see on the inside, not just into me you see on the outside. Here's my car, here's my this, here's my that, here's what I do here, this is what I do there. But the inner part, the feminine part, here's what I'm feeling. Here's the sensations that I have in my body when I'm doing this. Here's how it feels to get to the top of the power pyramid in our culture. It doesn't feel very good. It feels empty. This is how it feels. These are the sensations going in my body as I'm supposedly doing this great thing and that thing. This is what's going on inside of me. These are the parts that feel lonely, unnourished, unseen. And having, discovered some windows for my feminine self to emerge within the kind of high community and experiences, etc. What I was looking for was survival, security, love and belonging, a sense of self-esteem, ability to develop gifts, integrating those with the community, and being part of something bigger from high, to receive an environment in which my feminine identity could grow and live with honor. And that part is the part that got cut, that got wounded by Peter Sandhill, by the facilitator body, by the silence and collusion of the entire community. That it's okay to murder the feminine self in therapy, in repair of trauma, in sexual abuse. It's okay to kill off this part of the psyche because we're a chauvinistic cult. And the feminine in women, and even more so in men, is taboo. It's not something that we champion. We don't champion it at home. We don't champion it by preparing parents with the skill and empathy and attunement to actually care for a child so that they understand that their inner experience of being raised is actually relevant. We don't ask our children. We don't send out censuses so that as a 6-year-old, as a 10-year-old, as a 15-year-old, you get to say what you're feeling that week in relationship with this parent and what you're feeling that week in relationship to this parent, whether they're absent or otherwise. To actually rank and honor the level of well-being within the feminine psyche. And so it is very, very easy to drive people into suicidal states as they understand that there's a part of themselves that they identify with. We all identify with our feminine self and our masculine self. There's a part of ourselves that we identify with that has no honor, that has no support in basic education, in the education of parenting, in relational education, and so it is wounded. It is hurt. It is shamed. It is made to feel unwelcome. The message to every child raised in that environment is that who you are as a feminine being has no value. It is a liability. You have to learn to laugh with the comedians, with the sociopaths, to laugh at the pain and suffering of the feminine self. Too emotional, too much trouble. Rather than to honor and usher in the grace and the riches of the internal kingdom when both halves within, both the listener and the speaker, both the giver and the receiver, have equal honor in the interaction of all flows of human energy. Because all flows of human energy require a polarity, just like a battery. And so we do honor this in technical terms, meaning we're not quite dumb enough as a cult to produce to produce plugs and outlets with differing degrees of efficiency. We don't say that because outlets or receptacles, if some languages break things down into masculine and feminine, so a receptacle is more yin than a plug. So we don't say, well, we're just not going to invest in the technology of outlets because we actually do value the masculine dimension of the material world. But that's not what we're integrating into our education. We're learning about out there, and we're silencing simultaneously and shaming what's in here. Eric Weinstein, someone considered to have a learning disability in childhood, talks about the fact that because the education system is not designed to attune or understand the individual, that it's far easier to get angry at the children who don't do well in the sculpted environment based on existing paradigms and blame them for not working as hard than it is to have to adjust the system and understand that teachers do not know how to teach certain topics and various percentages of the population because those teaching models don't work. And so do you throw out the paradigm that's providing a sense of certainty and stability in order to make room for more reality and more individuals? Or do you throw out the individuals you are pledged to serve in order to hang on to your paradigm and hang on to your dogma? And we like to throw out our and blame our students for not doing as well as another student, rather than to challenge the environment for not being a competent and sophisticated model of teaching capable of reaching the human brain in all of its diversity, which is a natural phenomena, meaning nature is producing the diversity in individuals. And with every diversity, there is a gift and a curse, meaning there's a benefit, but there's a cost to that benefit. People who are blind suddenly develop exceptional hearing. But most of us would rather have eyes. But the diversity is a 5 billion year old program that says that complex, diverse ecologies ensure the continuation and development of life more successfully than monocrops, more successfully than everyone being equal in some abstract norm. That's not what produced life. And so the Irish potato famine is less likely to happen in nature with nature's program than it is with humans' programs. Because what humans do in violation of this ecological framework is they pick something like a potato, and then they pick the potato they like the most, and then they grow millions and millions of pounds of that one potato, which makes it susceptible to eradication, to a blight, because the more you concentrate on one thing, you can look at the same thing in viral patterns in computers. It's not necessarily that Apple has much better software. It's that it's a smaller segment of the market. And so if you're trying to cause mayhem by unleashing computer viruses, you will target whatever is the biggest program running, in this case Microsoft. And so you're more likely to be targeted with a virus if you have a Windows program than Apple, because there's this focus on monocropping of machines, monocropping of thousands of acres of one type of corn, monocropping of thousands of acres of genetically modified soybeans, etc. And this creates an environment that nature naturally wants to balance, to move back towards complexity and biodiversity by producing more and more virulent mites and pests to attack these large monocrops, which are not consistent with the most sustainable forms of life. And and in some ways, one of the things that might be seen as a mistake on my part is the level of investment with over 100 high events and working with 4 facilitators and writing a lot. The investment of a large amount of love and belonging and self-esteem and orientation, a lot of attention towards one group, towards one organization, and using their software. Ask for your 100%, be direct, have a safe sex conversation, state your boundaries, make requests, etc. That's a fairly standard bit of interactive technology. But it didn't work. It didn't work, and yet perhaps that fear of the unknown instilled in my own traumatic upbringing. It's unfortunate that both on an individual level and a group level, that the more traumatized you are in your history, the more you will cling to something that seems better than nothing and hold on to it even if it's not working, because of the fear of the unknown, the fear of, I don't know what would happen if I withdrew from this community and did this instead or this instead. There's the unknown. And so it's important to know how much of a linchpin love and belonging is for meeting these hierarchy of human needs. Because love and belonging is the linchpin in survival and security in an interdependent species, of which we are, meaning just try and live for a month without help from a single human being. And then you have to understand just how much help other human beings are giving us. You can't buy anything from another human being. That's their help. They're agreeing to sell that stuff. They're agreeing to accept you. If you were in apartheid or an African American in the South 60 years ago, you may not get help. They're not extending the sense of belonging And so you don't go to the good hospital and the good school. Your survival and security is severely truncated because there's no love and belonging. There's betrayal, judgment, and dishonor from a majority to a minority, or from those viewed at the top of the power chain to those viewed at the bottom. So, particularly with early childhood attachment disorder, where you either cling desperately or have nothing to do with something because there's nothing really in the middle if parents don't bond competently with their children emotionally in a way that lets the child know that they're valuable. It creates, you can kind of imagine the scenario of when you're knocked sideways with a big wave, you grab for whatever is around you to help you. And sometimes what you grab onto is rusty nails on a plank. It may give you tetanus later and, spear your skin, etc. But the sense of wanting to hang on to something certain is very high when someone is in a traumatic state, which is one of the reasons it's so hard to leave abusive relationships, is the more abused you are, the more you want to cling to something that's certain and familiar. But in an abusive relationship, the thing that is most certain and familiar is your abusive partner, or your abusive family, or your abusive community. And so as the trauma goes up, you cling harder, and that leads to a strong identification with the wound identity, as opposed to who you would be as a healthy human being if you were not being hit over the head with all these, various challenges. So one of the most difficult things in a state of isolation, terror, trauma, PTSD, etc., and shame, was to go from wanting to receive competent leadership from the Human Awareness Institute facilitators to survive, feel secure, have a sense of love and belonging, have a sense of self-esteem, develop my gifts, bring them out into the world, and be a part of something bigger than myself, is the fact that because my gifts are in an analytical, meaning pattern analysis is one of my talents, and truth-telling is one of my talents, and empathizing is one of my talents as a sensitive. But this, in a sociopathic environment where people are being harmed for this, or this isn't right, or this isn't right, seeing clearly and speaking truthfully is viewed as the enemy by the facilitator body. It's not viewed as the thing that we want to usher into our community. These truths cannot be spoken. What you see, we don't want it. We don't want you if you see these things. We don't want you if you feel these things about what you see. We don't want the feminine self emerging in you in this environment because it's threatening our reputation. It's threatening to reveal our incompetency or schizophrenia or hypocrisy. And so we only want team players that spout party lines. And, you can see this in Congress. You can, with whether it's about impeachment. But you can also see this at a family level, and you can see the same pattern at a high level. And this is why I see the connection, where if you don't want to see the abuses of power you see in Washington, you need to stop them at the family level and at high. Because it is these smaller scale systems that train and teach people what does and doesn't work, what will be allowed and what will be violated. that teach the people who will go on to have higher positions. If you don't stop it at a family level, you have to deal with it at a community level. If you don't stop it at a community level, you have to deal with it at a state and national level. And one way or another, you have to deal with it at all levels of a fractal pattern. Silence at home and then fighting corruption at Washington doesn't work, because you're breeding another generation in an abuse dynamic who is learning that the sociopathic reptilian brain is the only way to survive a dishonest, corrupt power environment in which this truth and this truth and this truth can never be mentioned at home. And then you get to a national level and you have this bizarre thing. We've got to stop the public from finding this out and this out, where your public servants are really in a conspiracy of silence and misinformation to protect national secrets, secrets of national violation, national abuse, national corruption, just like the family system is in service to protecting the secrets and the taboos and the dysfunction of the two parents, the extended family, the system, and make sure that no one finds out outside the family system, or it means certain death. So if you breed people who understand that in a family system and then elect people from that pool, the default mode would be to copy what was done at home, what was done in your community. And so the real gift, so to speak, of the national scene is to understand at some level that it's going on in the closest 100 people around you, and will continue to go on until a level of competency and love and integration is developed at that level that can sustain its integrity under the exploitive sociopathic attacks that are trying to reduce many of these traits and qualities of leadership and dignity, etc., down to the lowest common denominator. Because when you disengage from the norm, when one mother actually knocks on 500 doors until her family is safe, her children are safe, and they actually have a home in which they are honored for being a truth teller, that is an entirely different world. There is sexual abuse all around me. No one has ever knocked on my door. And they've learned not to. In a sociopathic culture, you learn that to ask for help when you really need it is dangerous and shameful, because you are hurt in doing so, and because the help, quote unquote, may make things worse. They may make things worse. I mean, just look at the basic psychology. You call the police and a 6-year-old girl is being molested, and she sees her parents falling apart. She sees sociopathic police officers that don't have trauma thing. There's flashing lights everywhere. There's sirens. How does this help someone not develop PTSD from that trauma? It is an atrocious and barbaric response to a sociopathic abuse system that's bad enough as it is. And then after that, we don't know how well we'll keep the family alive. We don't know how much money we're going to be able to make, and everyone withdraws. Because in a sociopathic framework, anyone who needs something is a threat to your limited supply when you're in the reptilian brain, as opposed to a valuable resource that we're going to integrate the gifts of this family into our neighborhood and our community. We're going to learn how to love, how to behave as adults in a way that help our individuals have security, survival, love and belonging, self-esteem, develop their gifts, bring them into the community, and be a part of something bigger than themselves. So I failed to keep many of my feminine personas alive. They started to die. I felt them freezing and numbing up, and felt myself entering into the reptilian brainstem, which in this environment where the betrayals are so extreme is characterized with hurt, rage, fear, hate, and the sense that whatever it is that's doing this to me must be destroyed, which, if you think of it in evolutionary terms, is healthy. If all you've got is instinct and you're surrounded by reptiles, then destroying a power structure that is causing your death, whether it's the death of a persona that's really important to you, the death of a religious identity that is important to you, the death of your dignity, is part of evolution. Because this is kind of this dance with free will that we have. For evolution to continue in human consciousness, all structures that regress evolution and that stimulate traumas must be destroyed to make room for lighter structures, more competent and intelligent structures that do not sociopathically murder part of the psyche that is vital for you to be an integrated and whole human being, and for you to be to grow and to contribute the most to the probability field of well-being for you as a family, as a species, etc. These systems have to be destroyed if they do not respond to empathy. If someone can be in tremendous amount of pain and their life gets worse when they ask for help, that is a system that has to be destroyed. Now, it can be destroyed with transformation into a beautiful system. It can be destroyed with partnering to create something amazing, or it can be destroyed by fighting or obliteration in some form. But it needs to be destroyed for evolution to continue. And what we have as the opportunity as human beings, not reptiles, is the opportunity to actually partner in this transformation. And to partner in a transformation of a corrupt power structure requires both the feminine. It requires the circle that has been tolerating the abuse to say no more. We're not tolerating it anymore. Because every power structure is supported by a circle. If you kill off the circle, that's the principle around, economic and political embargoes, etc., around certain rogue countries. If you cut off the source of food, which is always bigger than the minority in power, then they have to change and evolve, or they die. At the core level, whether they die as an entity, as an organization, whether they die as an individual, at some level you have to evolve in alignment with growth, with becoming, or you have to be destroyed. And that ultimately happens. More efficient, more beautiful, true, and good systems replace less efficient systems, or you go into anarchy and the whole process starts, all over again. But what's itching to happen is that this new level of development occurs. So, high being a primary source for love and belonging, I didn't have a place to put that, and so a lot of this kind of attention, etc., has just been. It's an object of survival and human need, but it's also an object of transcendence. It's not just high is correct in saying that it's not personal. No one set out to hurt me as much as possible and then abandon me in PTSD. I mean, that wasn't anyone's goal of the year. So it's not personal. The cult isn't personal. These default modes that are killing so many parts of the psyche and killing so many individuals as external representation, and this is another thing that's good to be aware of. As long as we have a cult that murders large portions of the inner psyche in a pathological genocide of chauvinism, of laying out a very clear and narrow route to be normal, we will have that externalized and represented in the killing off of indigenous people. The indigenous psyche is killed off as part of our upbringing. The indigenous people are killed off just as methodically. The inner has to be represented on the outside as a larger version of the same fractal pattern for us to learn what's going on. If you look at reality as a video game in which our goal is, as a species, to master the art of sustainably creating high levels of well-being for every person on the planet sustainably, and that's kind of the winning of the game, to have a symbiotic relationship with our host body, in which the host is more beautiful, more true, more good than it would be without us present as a species, as opposed to dead because of our species, in a more cancerous version of failing the game. Then we have to figure out the technology of consciousness, of paradigm, of interaction that works, and the technology that doesn't work. Now, just out of sheer mass, I was in no position to go head-to-head with 4 of my therapists, my entire community, etc. And so, as I understood that the violation was allowed by every community member and team member who said nothing. There was not a single community member or team member out of more than 600 that stepped up to say, we're going to stop this. So we're dealing with the same phenomena of the abusive feminine, the one who allows it. I'm not doing it. I'm just allowing it. But when the mother allows the abuse, the child gets the same message. You do not matter. You do not matter. And maybe it would have been different if, rather than tearing my heart and psyche to shreds and asking me to pay for it, if Peter had started hacksawing off parts of my body on a 10-hour recording, and because we're chauvinistic, of course, so the outer body really matters. The human heart doesn't matter. The outer body, really matters. So in a chauvinistic culture, I think we would have grasped that, screw depression, screw loneliness, screw being in despair and all that. That doesn't matter because it's feminine. But my goodness, his body was cut up. That's important, because in a chauvinistic paradigm, the outer body would be everything, and the inner body would be nothing. For the first time in my life, I broke two major bones in the process of all this. And, so that's thrust me into 8, 9, and 10 pain for, a period of time. But I noted in my mind that this pain was way preferable to the psychological pain of despair, loneliness, rage, watching myself freezing over. And I found it striking that I'm in a cult where nobody grasps this and no one responds. It's a violation cult of the feminine. The very part of me that I'm going to hide to give birth to is the part that's being chopped up with a machete. And no one says anything. And this is very, very important to grasp, because if it's happening in your community, it's happening within. And, I know enough about this kind of connection between the individual and the larger dynamics to understand that I might be able to change it on a personal level by distancing myself from the Human Awareness Institute and relating to myself and others differently. In other words, to recognize that at some level I was complicit in this wounding. Why didn't I see Peter Sandhill's pathology right off the bat when he pushed for an overdose of my first psychedelic against my protestations, against my dream that I'd had a few days earlier, without asking a single psychological question that would give him any idea of regulation, of appropriateness, of anything happening, without learning anything about what's going on inside or in the past or in the family system. In other words, it's pathologically insane to try and influence a system in a professional role without understanding it at all. That's incompetence. And so why didn't I see that? And I think some of it is just the dearth of alternative leadership. That when there's so little out there. It wasn't like I could go out and knock on 100 neighbors and say, I really need to see some change inside. And this doesn't feel safe, but I don't know where else to go. Any ideas? The same disinterest, the same pathology of, I don't know you, whatever, shows up. And then at a governmental level, etc., it's not like my government has ever showed an interest in my mental, emotional well-being. And nor will they show any interest in my well-being around any of this incident. The drug laws and protocols of the cult have made that very, very clear. This is not a war on drugs. It's a war on human beings. It's a war on human consciousness that threatens to disrupt the status quo. That was Nixon's whole plot behind making perfectly effective psychological tools in the right hands, absolutely illegal, is these were the types of people who were challenging Vietnam. So rather than apologize for setting a country on fire and burning children and women alive in the name of democracy, rather than apologize for that brutality, let's shut down the people. Let's traumatize the people who are protesting for human decency. And this pattern also, of course, played out within High. Let's shut down that which is healthy in our community and saying something needs to change here. Let's cut off his email accounts. We'll leave all the other ones, but let's cut off his email accounts. Let's sue him. Let's not ask for support for him. We want to protect the status quo. So what was interesting was I'm, flat on my back, running out of money, in desperate pain, trying to figure out the solution, because my feminine self was being cut up and dishonored rather than integrated. I'd asked Peter Sandhill to help me with my gifts. He ignored the question. I asked to be listened and held. That was ignored as well. As my, health collapsed, etc., in the series of traumas, etc., then no one took any notice at all. This wasn't a high issue, so there's exclusion. We don't want to deal with our shadow because the change is frightening because we're afraid of the unknown. And so this is how chauvinism at its core level, whether in the family system or a loving community or whatever it is, works. And so I shifted towards, I knew the pattern. I knew the pattern that had to happen because I knew, I watched everything High did that was wrong. And I understood that it would have been easier to do it the right way than it was to do it this way. In other words, I understood that my teachers were spending more energy to do it wrong than it would have taken to do it right, and that the results were catastrophic, and that they were reluctant to engage in change, the transformation into a healthy, empathic community with a different rendition of power, with a different value hierarchy that would support the feminine identity in feeling that it was welcome rather than it was feared, that it was honored rather than blamed and disowned. Peter Sandhill, in one of our first conversations, talked about that he was never going to trust me again for the rest of his lifetime, he said. He was never going to trust my feminine identity for telling the truth and asking for help. The abuser needs help. They're sick. And the victim needs help. They've been hurt and will get infected with the same disease if they are not helped. So I asked the facilitators, please help Peter and myself. So they all met without me to say, no, we're not going to do it. And it doesn't get more crazy-making than that for the Human Awareness Institute. So I switched very slowly and with great difficulty towards trying to give these human values to someone else. And it happened kind of intuitively, because obviously my rational brain was aligned with the abuse dynamic. Meaning I don't think Peter Sandhill would have been able to abuse me the way he did if there wasn't an abuser in me that was trained by a sociopathic cult to abuse and dishonor my feminine in the same way that Peter did. And I don't think he would have been able to do it also if he hadn't been a therapist and under the influence of psychedelics, because I take pretty good care of my feminine self, relatively speaking. But under the influence of a massive dose in a crisis with a therapist and then backed up by all his cronies, no, I couldn't shift that pattern, basically. I couldn't force abusive people towards the feminine to honor the feminine in me. Probably because you have to do that to yourself first before you can honor it in another human being. You cannot honor the feminine in another person when your inner masculine is treating your inner feminine like shit. So I kind of stumbled into this opportunity where I started, having failed to receive this and get healthy that way, and actually being attacked, to give what I hadn't received. And that's very, very hard to do because, as I say, I was on my back and in a lot of fear and trauma. But I had an intuition that meeting with this one woman would give me the chance to be of service to her. I knew she wasn't going to meet these needs for me, but I thought I had a sense that I could be of use to her, basically. And so I started inverting everything Hai did wrong. I tried to do the opposite of it with her. And so the focus in loving someone is to behave in a way that helps them survive, feel secure, feel a sense of love and belonging for all of themselves. Develop self-esteem for all of themselves, not just the politically correct personas inside the full psyche. Developing gifts, integration, and transcendence. So one of the things that chauvinism creates in our cult is that no one wants to receive help because that's considered weak, because it's considered feminine. To receive is feminine. So in a chauvinistic cult, to receive means to lose rank. If you need someone, you're less valuable than if you don't need them. So we all pretend that we don't need people and all that and we have these defenses up because we don't want to be shamed for being feminine. Women do this as much as any man. Try and be kind and helpful and empathic to someone you don't know very well who's a woman. And they're like, what's all this about? They know the game, that they're going to be shamed and lose face in a certain way because of the pervasiveness of chauvinism. But this woman was Filipina, and so she didn't have that chauvinism. So that was the first kind of refreshing to understand. So she's taught me, basically. She's been my teacher on how to be a healthier human being than most of the individuals inside and out in my cult, which is riddled with chauvinism. So she didn't have the shame around receiving. So that's healthy. So she's already healthier than me and healthier than most Americans in that position, because it's profoundly intelligent to receive support or help in meeting one's human needs. It's the most, it doesn't get any more intelligent than that. And so not having a big defense around that made, of course, that very easy. And so I decided, partly out of rebellion, partly out of experimentation, partly because it seemed like the right thing to do, partly because it was so painful to find this denied in myself, in my community. Because every single person that I told about this event who said nothing and did nothing to protect the others wounded me with the message that the feminine in my paradigm does not warrant protection. So I will say nothing. I will not fight for you. I will not fight for the feminine in this community. It's not personal. That's just what happens in this abuse cult. So what you need to do is just get over it. And then the status quo will continue. And so there was several little admonishments. Forgive the facilitators, and then move on. Don't participate in any change. Don't rock the boat. And of course, as an abused child, that works better than trying to confront the parents, because the parents just hit you for trying to advocate for healthy boundaries or whatever it is. But that's the problem. When abused children grow up without learning what the abuse was and call it love and think that's normal, because it is normal. It's just pathological. And so I started to teach her from a position of empathy, which is, in this relationship, I was older than her. I had more money than her. And so in the same way that the big one, it's the relationship in any dynamic of any kind of a vertical relationship, there's a big one and there's a small one. And in an empathic, healthy culture, the big one protects the small one. In a sociopathic culture, the big one kills or exploits or uses or manipulates the small one for their own gratification. And that's the difference between an abuse cult and a loving cult. So I started helping with her survival by teaching her skills. And my guideline was that for her to grow stronger, because the goal is an independent adult on the other side, that for her to grow stronger, she would need to do most of the work and do it in a way, because I didn't know how long I would live at the time, and so it seemed irresponsible to create any kind of a dependency. And so I would give suggestions and advice, and then she'd spend 2 to 4 hours a day doing the advice, and her life would get better. And that's the most important thing. And then Like when a thief stole her phone, I got her a tablet. And when someone else stole the tablet, I got her another tablet. So there was a protection against the predatory nature of her culture. But that tool in our world today, so many resources open up around having an active phone, having an active tablet, and stuff like that. Just meant that you can't transcend the stupidity of what's around you if you don't have some portal out into something bigger. So I did that. But I just focused on mindset and teaching, etc., that could help her survival, her security. Now, because I was doing that, and because no one had ever done that for her, she opened up emotionally to share things with me about that she'd never shared with anyone. And so she shared about her abusive history, etc. And luckily, I had read The Body Keeps the Score just before. A stranger in a cafe had recommended it, and I got it, and so it's I understood what she was dealing with. And so I made sure that everything she said was welcome except her internal abuser. That's where I would fight her, because like anyone who's never been supported by an adult gets preyed upon, and they learn to blame themselves for the atrocities committed by big people that they can't stop. And it's a way to create an illusion of control. Because if you're an abused child, you can't stop the abuse. But you feel helpless and powerless if you grasp that and live in that reality. I can do nothing about this, and I'm never going to be able to. So that's too disabling. So the psyche invents a delusion that says it's my fault, and because it's my fault, I will be able to fix it someday. And so every abused child holds themselves at some level responsible for all the abuse of the sociopathic grown-ups around them, and the sociopathic grown-ups who did nothing, because that's part of the abuse. Part of the abuse is the violation, and part of it is the allowing. When you have regular abuse and everyone allows it, you have a complete symmetry in the message: you are worthless because you are not big enough to defend, and we are big, and we've got other priorities. And that's the message that every abused child takes into their body. And then they come up with this delusion that it's their fault, partly because that appeases the abuser, who doesn't want to feel guilty for their abuse, and partly, so there's a survival benefit there, and then partly the illusion of control is very important. If you're going to have any sense of agency, you've got to have some sense that it's up to you. Otherwise, you just collapse and it's hopeless and die. And she'd actually strongly considered suicide at 8 years old. And so in that environment, I knew how to validate everything that she was saying. And everything that she was saying was telling me that she was the sanest, healthiest person in her circle. And that rang a bell, because I knew I was being shut out, not for being a sex addict, not for lying. None of that. That's commonplace at high. What I was being pushed out for was telling the truth. And that wasn't welcome. And so I understood how healthy people can be the scapegoats in an unhealthy system. And I couldn't stop it with me. But I realized that I was big enough that I could stop it with her if she wanted to. And that's a big question. There's a huge uncertainty in shifting out of survival tactics into actually becoming and honoring who you are. It's a tremendous honor if someone in that type of abuse dynamic actually trusts you enough to shift identity out of the wound and into the healthy dynamic. But I realized I had, as I said, I didn't know how long, but I had the ability to buffer some of that. So some of that was with the phone, some of that was with our interactions. And she would send me emails and recordings every day. And I asked her, I said, tell me everything that's going on. One, tell me what you think about what's going on, and tell me what you feel about what you think. Because that's the script. That's how the day gets built. And I'd used this in my teen years to learn to think. This is what happened. This is what I think about what happened. This is what I feel about what happened. This is what's going on in my body about what happened. And this is what I'm going to do about what happened. So I was doing this at 15, 16, 17 while the abuse was going on, outside. And outside my room. And this had helped me build mental blocks of healthy concepts and get out of that house by 17. And so I invited her to do what had worked for me, and she would do it. The only trouble is she was blaming herself for every single stupidity of the people around her. So she started reading the books that I suggested. Suddenly she was weird, because in her world, nobody read books. So then she's getting poked at, right? Why are you reading books? That's weird. And so, and this is where you really start to understand the power of the cult. She was surrounded by people who didn't read books. The books were exactly what she needed to do to reprogram the idea that all of her abuses were her fault. And now she's being abused for doing what's healthy. So your love and belonging is decimated when you're in an abuse family, because you get the exact opposite of love and belonging. You are to be used for my gratification. You don't belong other than to gratify me. You have no value. There's nothing of dignity within you. And it's very, very, I'm moved to tears, because what's so amazing about the human spirit and the human psyche, 1,000 people abuse you? 1,000 people stand by? 1,000 people pretend nothing went on, and 1,000 people cover it up. And then one person says, not on my watch. And the psyche lights up, and at 1,000 to 1 odds, starts turning around and undoing decades of insanity, delusion, and abuse in order to respond to one healthy beacon towards safety and towards growth. That's how easy it is for us to win. Meaning, this is a game we're playing to see how long it takes us and what algorithms we use to create maximum sustainable well-being for all people. Then we win the game. We can stay physical and hang out here, or go off to other places. But that's a game we're up to, and it's a game that's designed to win. It is a game that is destined to win, because we recover in so many ways faster than we are wounded. And if you just look at this constant message, you don't belong, you don't belong, you don't belong, you're worthless, and then one person says, no, you're valuable. You're incredibly valuable. And change starts to happen at 1,000 to 1 odds. It's incredible. And so the hierarchy of human needs is, survival, security, love and belonging, etc. So what we were focusing on was loving and belonging of the inner self, loving the inner child, but also educating and understanding the landscape that you're in. She was working as a golf caddy. And, just basic things. She was a golf caddy, and no one had bothered to look at her eyes. And she's asked to see at distances, and her eyes aren't very good. She needs glasses. $40 and a life-changing event. One person bothers to see her and respond with honor, honoring the species, honoring our potential, honoring the probability. One person. And then her job prospects go up. The amount of verbal abuse goes down when she can see how to do her job. But it just takes a little bit of understanding. And I knew what a big deal this was, and I knew how blind, because therapists were not asking me the questions that would help them help me. Money wasn't an issue, and still people weren't seeing the traumatic symptoms and stuff like this. And so, as I say, I was very grateful I'd read the book. And so so to love another human being as an adult, you have to interact in a way that supports survival, security, love, and belonging. And so, and I felt quite passionate about this because I knew I only needed one person and they weren't there. And then comes in the hypocrisy. Well, who am I being that one person for? And, a fortuitous gift opens up. I have the opportunity to start practicing what I'm preaching. And this is another way to shift the fractal pattern. If you can't stop abusers abusing you, you can stop abusing other people and start loving other people. And the medicine of the new pattern enters the psyche either as a giver or a receiver. We don't have a lot of control over the capacities of others. Now, it's very difficult to learn how to do for another what nobody's done for you. That's very, very hard because it's not, intuition is so often templates. And so I just used the guide of let's do the opposite of what Hai was doing, because that caused lots of pain. What they did caused lots of pain. So if I do the opposite, I think I'll be in the right direction. So wasn't a high issue. So what would I say? It's not my issue you don't have glasses. How about saying it is my issue? It's my issue as a human being. I think it should be a human issue when someone asks us for help, not this, this endless, it's not my job description, so go to hell. It's kind of sad and it's kind of petty. If you have some sense that there could be something a lot better. And so, okay, so it is my issue. And as I said, not knowing how long I would be around at that point, glasses are not a dependent thing. A phone isn't a dependent thing. An allowance would be, so that's not good. I don't want a relationship in which she crashed in the way that I crashed when Hai turned their back. I want the relationship where wherever we leave off, she's better off as she goes forward. And so we looked at survival, security, and love and belonging. And a lot of it came, I think, I asked her to write a book about every key emotional thing that had happened in her life. She sat down and did it, which just speaks volumes about her beauty and her intelligence. I mean, to trust some foreigner when every person around you has betrayed you, it's incredible. It's just so beautiful. Where we come back to love. If we have a smidge of an opportunity. And, and she's, of course, teaching me to trust, teaching me to learn, teaching me the beauty of her femininity. And so what better way to heal the shredded feminine part in myself than to learn from someone who's being feminine in a beautiful way, and to honor that myself, to practice honoring the feminine in me by honoring that in her. And this was very medicinal, meaning I wasn't expecting this. Why would I? I don't know what I'm doing in a culture that doesn't teach us how to navigate these waters at all. It just thrusts us into them and then blames us when we drown. To my great surprise, because I felt a little bit like a martyr initially, it's like I need lots of help, and I've just got one other person that needs things. This is not going to be very good for me. But there was also an intuition, like this would have worked if anyone at High had done this for me. One person would have been enough. So maybe I could be that one person for her. Well, very rapidly, watching someone grow, become, honor who they are as a human being, learn, get happier, it's infectious. And it's, so this was the high point of my day. Thinking about High was the low point of my day. Thinking about her growth and becoming was the high point of my day. And so when she wrote this book, about 40 pages or so, and I read through it, all things pointed towards exploitation and betrayal and usury. That was the common theme. Every single major emotional event was going that way. So in medicine, you have to balance things by doing the other way. So that helped me to understand if I wanted to be medicinal in her life, I would have to put her and her survival, security, love and belonging, self-esteem, developing gifts, integration, and transcendence ahead of any of my own needs. That her human needs would have to come first for the relationship to be medicinal. And so that came up to the question, was I in a position to do that as a very needy person? Was I in a position to do it? Could I do it? And was I willing to do it? And I felt that I could do like a 6 out of 10 job at that, and that I was willing to do it, and that I was clear it would be better than nothing. And so on that basis, I would spend about 15 minutes a day initially reading through all that she was up to and stuff like that, and then advocating. Anytime she boosted herself up, I'd advocate for that. Anytime she knocked herself down to protect her abusers, I'd challenge that. And I'd say, what do you mean? So some asshole is too dumb to know that books are intelligent, so they make you feel bad for being more intelligent than they are? Fuck that. Throw it back at them. That is not intelligent. They may be older than you. They may be cooler in your cult than you. That doesn't mean that they know what they're doing here. And this is the privilege of being in a bigger position. So so Peter was in the big position for me, but behaved, smallly. And High was in the big position for me, which means they have enormous positive and negative ability to influence me because of the impact of mass, scale, reputation, belief, the whole thing. Well, I had a little bit of that effect because in Asia, they actually respect elders. And it's a novel idea, I understand, in the United States, but elders are actually respected. So I was older than her, which meant that I would benefit from the cult programming to respect the elder. I was white, and I don't agree with it, but most Asian countries idealize white skin. It's absurd. We idolize tanned skin, but it's that same thing. You always love what isn't you in a sociopathic, cult. So I had white skin. I was older. And in Asia, there is a healthy form of there are remnants of a healthy form of masculine bias and feminine bias. The elder is, you can ask, in Philippines, you can ask most women, if you're a younger woman, you can say ati. And what that means is I'm claiming you as my aunt for right now, as an older woman, and I have a need, and you are obligated to help me meet my need. And this is phenomenal. I didn't understand this, and it was beautiful to see it in action. And I'd watched it happen, where one girl that really felt very insecure, etc., claimed ati of an older person, and that person took care of her. So so there's some very interesting things about that. And then the employee and the employer, there's a much more integrated relationship between the employee and the employer. A good employer in several various parts of Asia, a good employer takes care of the employee and the family, and will loan money, help with medical bills of family, and that's actually viewed as to be expected, that you would expect the healthy masculine to protect the healthy feminine, that the bigger one would protect the smaller one. So it diverges from the sociopathic ethic that runs much of Western capitalism in that thing. And so I had that. So I was not viewed as a stranger threat the way I would be viewed in my own country. I was viewed as someone to be respected because I was older, because I was white, because I was male. And so that I realized that I had a responsibility to use influence to balance things out. And so I would fight for her. Whether I would teach her meditation things, etc., etc. And I just had one meeting with her, and then we were doing all this with email and stuff. And I fell in love with her beauty. I mean, it's just, the human spirit is so beautiful. It's like, thank you for reminding me who we are as human beings. You give us half the chance with honesty and integrity and real leadership, and we grow. That's who we are. And it takes 10,000 people to knock us down. We still don't break lots of the time. And we want to grow. We want to come back to who we are. And so she was, very, very medicinal in, the one thing that's really good. And so I fell in love with the beauty of that. It wasn't a sexual love. That has never been the linchpin in this kind of interaction. But that it also, Hai had taught me, having spent time with 100 lovers, that sex does not have to have anything to do with love. Many sexual partners are far more abusive to their partner than they are to people they're not having sex with. So sex is not the linchpin in a healthy relationship, and so that wasn't the draw. But this was very, very interesting to just watch her explode into life, because I had felt that I was ready for that explosion into life. but there wasn't an adult that kind of gave permission or guided me through breaking the abuse contracts, helped me understand the technology of trauma, etc., to do it. And that didn't seem to be showing up. And so could I do it based on what I hadn't received and knew would have been useful, and based on the opposite of high? So I started owning things that I thought high would say, that's not my problem. So I said, okay, that is my problem. And so just having me read every important emotional thing and things that she hadn't shared with any other human being, and having me explain it in psychological terms. Like, you cut yourself when you're completely helpless and you're in lots of inner pain and no one's responding to the inner pain. And the outer pain gives you a way to take control of it and distract from the inner pain. And so there's a relief. So good job. Of course you're cutting yourself. Good job. But we're going to create a life where you have control, where you have, and you're not being hurt like that. And it begins by honoring who you are as a human being. And that where you have been hurt has nothing to do with you. And your growth and who you are has everything to do with you. And this tack brings integration. It brings vitality. It brings enthusiasm. Now, I was very aware that there was a very complicated series of awarenesses around all of this, because Peter ruined all this potential, not only because he didn't have that leadership element, but also by escalating a sexual relationship under the influences of psychedelics, etc. And so I felt, and I understood how the pleaser can try and say what the abuser wants, because there's a survival instinct and there's a need for love and belonging. And so as I fell in love with her over a period of some weeks, just watching this beautiful person become a human being again, I realized that with my attachment disorder and and traumatic history and all that I wouldn't be able to sustain this support relationship, most likely, if the lover relationship broke up. That's the trouble with attachment disorder and stuff. I've never been able to have friendships with past lovers. It's kind of an all or nothing thing. And so I felt that what was most important for her was to have a stable partner as she became herself, with support, with someone saying, go on it. That's exactly right. I agree with you. That's healthy. That's beautiful. And so the way that I brought it up, I said, first of all, I'm a terrible lover partner in many ways, with all this trauma going on and stuff, and that has nothing to do with you. Secondly, I probably don't have the emotional capacity to stay connected if a lover relationship breaks up. And thirdly, statistically speaking, if we are lovers, it would be a very short lover relationship. And fourthly, that I think that the most important thing for you is to grow and continue developing, in the way that you're doing. And I will do that as long as you want me as a mentor. As long as it's helping you, and we can look at it daily and see how many of my ideas worked and didn't work and all that, then I will happily serve as long as you want. It wasn't hard, spending 20 minutes a day and having a very catalytic impact. And so I said, checking in with yourself, what do you think? Do you think that being lovers is something that you would enjoy and would be good for you? The benefit is we'd spend more time together, but these are the negatives. And I'm clear that this mentoring thing is working well. I'm not clear about the lover dynamic. I mean, I was clear that I was in love, but it's just hard not to be enamored with such inner truth and honesty and just beauty is incredible. And I said, why don't you think about it? And you can let me know if you'd like to have a mentor or a mentor plus a lover with the possibility of it blowing up, because of what I'm dealing with. And I said that, what I would like is whatever she wanted. And, to my delight, but also my stress, because I understood my responsibility, she said she'd like to be lovers. And so she took 2 weeks off work, and we kind of explored that dynamic. And this allowed us to deal with trauma in a more visceral way, because all the trauma had left various symptoms in her body. She had restless leg syndrome, for example. I had PTSD, I was terrified of any changes and stuff, and then she'd be thrashing about. And so then we developed modalities to deal with these things, because the body stores stuff that the consciousness is not capable of handling alone, or doesn't have the technology to deal. But she was with someone that she trusted. And so what we did in person was as the body demonstrated symptoms, we'd interrupt the symptom so that the underlying energy pattern, emotional and psychological, would become more conscious, because the physical symptoms distract and mask and bury and hold that which the psyche isn't ready to deal with. So we talked about this and traumatic theory and stuff. And so, for example, if I would lay on top of her and just hold her, pain and grief and stuff would come up as the motion, restless motion and stuff wasn't available as the distraction. So then it would come to light. So that incredible attention to detail, incredible passionate presence. I'm here with you. I'm not leaving you. This can take as long as it takes. I would lay there for hours sometimes. And, hour after hour after hour, the trauma is getting the message there's safety here. I can come out. These horrors can come to light. I can look at them. I'm not going to be overwhelmed by them. I've got someone anchoring me here, and sometimes I would squeeze her as hard as I could to make sure she was in her body and not getting lost, in the trauma. We're here. We're here bringing this out. You're not being cast back into the abyss. And so, we'd go into these places where the messages were residing in the body, etc., until there could be familiar patterns. The little girl that was banished to the dark room that nobody loved, and that's waiting there, knowing that she is hated, hating herself, and feeling that it's her fault. That's a real persona in many abused people, and so we'd go into that room together. That's fine. She doesn't have to come out, but we're going in. And that little girl is not going to be left alone. I will hold you. I will sing to you. I will care. I will listen. I will validate. And I will fight for that little girl. She didn't deserve to be put in there. It was not her fault. She's the only sane person in the fucked up group around her. And I'm not leaving her there. There I am. Well, then the dialogue can come in. Is it okay to talk to her? Is it okay to connect in any way? Or is it not? She can have whatever she wants, but she is not taking the brunt of fucked up sociopathic assholes who dump their shame and abuse onto little children. Fuck that. I'm not going along with that. And that those battles, which admittedly were experimental, because there's a big difference between violating the self and advocating for the self, and it's not clear what that difference is. But I also understand that you need to create a healthy, safe, stable environment in order for the transition from the wound identity to the authentic self to occur. You can't do it in volatile and uncertain environments because the wounded identity is stable. It's a fixed point in a sea of trauma, and so you cling to that wound because it's the only thing that's solid in a chaotic and sociopathic environment of big people and big things that are out of your control. And so I had a sense that it would take 2 years of increasing safety and confidence before, if I disappeared, she could hold the healthy relationship to the wound herself without reenacting self-abuse in order to feel certain and feel safe in the familiarity of the wound. And this was very, very frustrating because my government has made it almost impossible for 98% of Filipinas to come visit. So that was the first hurdle. So I'm being set up to fail already with my government. And I also knew I didn't have the patience. I mean, I'm just sickened by the way that we treat human beings in this condition. And, I feel nothing but disgust and rage for my government's, cruelty in response to some of these things. I mean, you can't go to your embassy and actually have a human conversation and say this is someone, in a psychological transition out of trauma, who's an amazing human being, and anyone is lucky to have anything to do with her. And I want her in my country where I have to work. You can't have a human conversation like that. It's too intelligent. And so, that was a friction point. Then there was the problem with the internet. You just can't get decent internet in the Philippines. It's absolutely atrocious. And so how were we going to long distance through all this? And so I moved her to Thailand. I got her passport, moved her to Thailand where they have great internet, but also healthier people. And it also helps to break the abuse cycle. Because when your whole culture is abusive, and there's a lot of abuse in the Philippines because of the poverty, and the whole dynamic with the Catholic Church and And so that was one of her abusers. So having a change of setting is part of the environment. It's part of confidence. It's also part of, building a new identity. So moved her to Thailand, got her an apartment. But also business is really important for self-sufficiency. And so first, she's so empathic and helpful and kind that I thought she would be a great dating facilitator, because there's a different culture and all that, and so I thought she might enjoy that. So we started that, and then she was too shy to talk with Westerners, and that's where the market is in terms of that business, because there's